I shouldn't have remembered her voice as clearly as I did. It was just a sentence, quiet, almost careless, but it lingered like the scent of smoke long after the fire was gone. You'll regret loving me. That was the first time she spoke to me directly, in the narrow, fluorescent-lit space of Whitman's Auto Repair, where I'd been working part-time since leaving school. I was under the hood of a sedan, grease on my fingers, half listening to the radio crackle, when the sound of her heels cut across the shop's concrete floor. Sharp, measured, and nothing like the usual hurried shuffle of customers. I didn't look up at first, but then I heard the scrape of a chair. She sat in the waiting area, straight-backed, one leg crossed over the other, a book in her lap. Who brings a book to a repair shop? When I finally glanced over, the air seemed too still. She wasn't the kind of woman you could ignore. Mid-40s maybe, but she carried herself with that unshakable calm people either envy or fear. Her hair tied neatly, not a strand out of place, eyes sharp but softened by something I couldn't name. I dropped my wrench louder than I meant to. She looked up at the noise, met my eyes, and held them just long enough to make me uncomfortable. Then, the smallest thing, she smiled like she knew what she was doing to me, and lowered her gaze back to the book. That's how it began, with silence pressing in from all sides, my heart doing the kind of nervous pounding I usually reserve for exams or fights. Need a refill? I asked after a while, pointing to her half-empty styrofoam cup of coffee. My voice cracked at the edges, like I'd forgotten how to talk. She tilted her head slightly, considering, then nodded once. Not a word wasted. I grabbed the pot from the back and poured it for her. When I set it down, her hand brushed mine, maybe by accident, maybe not, but it was enough. A quick spark, and suddenly I was aware of how dirty my hands were, how young I must have looked compared to her neat composure. "You're too polite for this place," she said, finally breaking the silence. Her tone was dry, but not unkind. I laughed, unsure what else to do. Guess I don't fit the job description. Her eyes lingered on me for a beat longer than necessary. That's when she said it, lightly, almost like she was quoting from her book rather than speaking to me. "You'll regret loving me." I froze. She didn't even look up this time, just turned another page like the words hadn't shattered the air between us. I wanted to ask what she meant, if it was a warning or a test, but instead I muttered, half under my breath, "Then I'll love regret too." She didn't react, at least not in the way I expected. No smile, no laugh. Just the faintest pause, her eyes not moving across the page anymore. For a heartbeat, I thought she'd heard me. For another, I thought maybe she hadn't. The shop phone rang, the spell broke, and I had to get back under the hood. But even as I tightened bolts and checked fluid levels, I kept glancing at her reflection in the window. The way she sat, unreadable, a fortress of calm I couldn't stop circling. By the time her car was ready, she left without another word, without a glance back. Just the click of her heels fading out the door. And still, long after the bay was empty and the coffee had gone cold, all I could hear was her voice. "You'll regret loving me." I didn't expect to see her again so soon. Most people came into the shop once, then disappeared back into their lives. But a week later, there she was, standing just outside the bay door, arms folded, her car idling at the curb like it, too, was reluctant to return. "Check engine light again?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. She gave the smallest shrug, like even admitting the problem was a chore. "It keeps stalling. Thought I'd bring it back before it leaves me stranded." Her tone was practical, brisk, but there was something in the way she lingered just outside instead of stepping fully in, as if she wasn't sure she wanted to cross that invisible threshold again. "Pull it in. I'll take a look." She hesitated, then slid behind the wheel and parked inside. I opened the hood, trying not to stare but catching every detail anyway. The way she tapped her fingers lightly against the steering wheel when she thought no one was watching. The faint shadows beneath her eyes, hidden well but not completely. The kind of tiredness that doesn't come from one sleepless night, but from carrying too much for too long. "Busy week?" I asked, my head ducked under the hood. Her answer was delayed, like she was deciding how much of herself to give away. "Aren't they all?" I smiled to myself. That was the kind of line people throw out to shut down curiosity. Still, There was a softness in her voice, the smallest crack in her armor. I tightened a clamp, checked a belt. Nothing major, I said. Just a loose connection. Happens more often than people think. Simple fix then? She sounded almost relieved, but there was a deeper note beneath it, the kind you only hear if you're really listening. Yeah, I said. Sometimes things only need the smallest adjustment. She glanced at me then, quick but sharp, like she caught more in the words than I intended. For a moment, I thought she might smile, but instead she looked away, busying herself with her bag in the passenger seat. Guard up again. I wanted to ask her name, but the timing never felt right. Instead, I noticed her hands, resting on the edge of the steering wheel now. Long fingers, steady, but she rubbed her thumb against her palm as though grounding herself. A small, unconscious gesture, gone the second she realized I was watching. You're observant, she said, catching me. I almost dropped the wrench. Sorry. Habit. This job makes you notice small things. This time, she did smile. Not wide, not open, but real enough to tilt the air between us. Dangerous habit, she murmured. I didn't answer, because the silence suddenly felt louder than words. When I closed the hood and handed her the keys, her fingers brushed mine again. This time, she didn't pull away immediately. Just the briefest pause, a half-second too long, before she slipped the keys from my hand and lowered her gaze. Thank you, she said, softer than before. And it was ridiculous, really. 2 words. A passing touch. But as she drove off, the shop echoing with the quiet she left behind, I felt it. That gentle pull I had no business following and no strength to resist. It was a Thursday evening when she came back, long after most customers were gone. The shop was half closed, the neon sign buzzing faintly against a sky heavy with rain. I was cleaning tools when the sound of her knock broke through the quiet. Still open? She asked, stepping in before I could answer. Her coat was damp, her hair darker from the drizzle outside. Not really, I said. But for you, sure. She gave me a look, not a playful one, not exactly. More like she wanted to warn me not to say things I didn't understand. Still, she walked in, setting her car keys on the counter like a truce. It's nothing serious, she said. Just the dashboard lights again. I didn't want to wait until morning. I took the keys and went out to the car. She followed, standing close under the narrow strip of light above the bay. The storm pressed around us, rain tapping against the corrugated roof, thunder a distant rumble. I leaned into the car, checking connections, but her presence was impossible to ignore. She stood so near that the faint warmth of her shoulder brushed mine when she leaned to look. Too close for strangers. Too close for whatever it was we were pretending to be. You work late a lot, she said, her voice quieter than usual, carrying a weight I couldn't place. Helps to keep busy, I replied, though my throat was dry. When I glanced at her, I caught something unguarded in her expression, the faint slump in her posture, the way her mouth pressed shut as if to stop herself from saying more. Before I could speak, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her coat pocket, checked the screen, and frowned. For a moment, she just stared at the name. Then, with a sharp inhale, she silenced the call and slipped it back without answering. I wanted to ask. I didn't. Instead, I tightened the final clamp and closed the hood. Done, I said, handing her the keys. She took them, fingers brushing mine again, and this time she didn't move. Not immediately. Her hand lingered, warm, steady, like she hadn't decided whether to hold on or let go. I looked at her, really looked, and the silence between us changed. No longer awkward, no longer guarded. Something charged, like if I leaned just half an inch closer, everything would unravel. Her lips parted slightly, as if she were about to speak. My heart stumbled in my chest. But then she stepped back. A measured retreat. She slid the keys into her coat pocket, straightened her posture, and nodded once like nothing had happened. Thank you, she said, voice steady again. I watched her leave, the storm swallowing her figure in the rain, and I couldn't shake the half-second before she pulled away. The breath we almost shared, the words she almost said. A moment I would replay long after the night was over. It was after hours again. The shop smelled of oil and rain. The storm had passed, But the air was still damp, the night pressed close against the windows. I stayed late, wiping down tools, dragging my feet on going home. Her car pulled up without warning. No excuse this time. No engine light, no pretense. She just walked in, coat draped over her arm, eyes tired but steady. "You're still here," she said. "Guess I don't know when to leave," I answered, setting down the rag. She leaned against the counter, folding her arms. For once, she didn't fill the silence with efficiency or small talk. She just looked at me, long enough that I felt my pulse in my throat. Finally, I broke. "Why do you keep coming back?" Her eyes flickered, just slightly. "Why do you keep letting me?" The question cut sharper than I expected. I laughed, but it came out nervous. "I don't know." We let the quiet stretch until it became unbearable. Every second was a question neither of us wanted to ask. She shifted, uncrossed her arms, and exhaled slowly, like she was giving in to something heavy. "This isn't normal," she said at last, voice low. "I know." Her gaze pinned me. "Then what are we doing?" The words landed like a confession. Not romantic, not tender, just raw, confused honesty. Her face was composed, but her hand gripped the counter edge too tightly, betraying her. I didn't have an answer. My throat closed around every thought, every denial. I wanted to tell her I didn't care what we were doing, that I couldn't stop circling whatever this was. But all I managed was a shaky half-smile. Maybe we're both just bad at leaving. She didn't smile back. She studied me like I was something she couldn't allow herself to want, but couldn't quite refuse either. The silence between us grew heavy, dense. She shifted a step closer, then stopped herself. I felt the pull, that ache of almost, but neither of us moved. Her voice finally cracked, softer than I'd ever heard it. "You're too young to waste your time on me." I swallowed, heat rushing through me. "Maybe you're too strong to admit you need someone." Her eyes shone for just a second, not tears exactly, but something that looked dangerously close. She turned away then, gathering her coat, shielding herself. At the door, she paused, her back still to me, her voice barely audible. "I can't be what you think I am." And with that, she left, leaving me alone in the silence that said more than touch ever could. I hadn't seen her for days. The shop felt different without the echo of her heels, without the weight of her silence filling the corners. I told myself I was fine, just busier, just tired, but every time the door opened, I found myself looking up too quickly. Then, one evening, she came back. Not with her car this time. She just walked in holding something small in her hand, her face unreadable. "Sorry," she said, voice lower than usual. "I know I shouldn't keep showing up." I shook my head. "You don't need a reason." That earned me a look, sharp and fragile at once. She set the object on the counter between us. A photograph. I glanced down. A man stood in it, mid-30s, smiling, one arm around her shoulders. She looked younger, softer. Not the fortress I knew now. There was warmth in her face, and also a shadow I hadn't noticed before. "He died," she said simply. No build-up, no warning. Just the truth, dropped like a stone in still water. The air in the shop shifted. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I wanted to reach across the counter, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at the photo again, then back at her. "I'm sorry," I whispered, because it was all I had. She exhaled, a breath too heavy for her frame. It was years ago, but sometimes her voice trailed off. She pressed her fingers to her temple, as if steadying herself. "Sometimes I see pieces of him. In other people. In places he never walked." Her eyes found mine then. She didn't say it outright, but I felt it, the weight of her seeing him in me. And I didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. I swallowed hard. "That's why you keep coming back." Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of her coat sleeve. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just weak." "You're not weak," I said too quickly, too firmly. The sound of my own voice startled me. She gave the faintest smile, bitter and tender at once. "You don't know me well enough to say that." I wanted to argue, but instead, silence wrapped around us again. She picked up the photograph, holding it carefully, like it might break. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer, closer to a confession than anything else. "I shouldn't have told you this," she whispered. "But now you know." And with that, she slipped the photo back into her coat and left me standing there, my chest aching with something I couldn't name, shaken not by her leaving, but by the fact that for the first time, she had let me see the fracture beneath her walls. I found her sitting in the back corner of the bookstore across from the shop. She wasn't reading, just staring at a closed book in her lap, her posture tighter than usual. For a moment, I thought about leaving her be. But she looked up, and when our eyes met, it was already too late to walk away. "Didn't expect to see you here," I said softly, easing into the chair across from her. "You always seem to find me," she replied, not unkindly. Silence stretched between us. Not the charged silence of the shop, not the guarded kind, either. Just heavy, waiting. She traced her finger along the book's spine, a nervous habit I'd never seen in her before. "You didn't scare me off," I said finally. Her eyes flickered, then held mine. "You should have been. Most people are. I'm not most people." She exhaled, the faintest laugh escaping. It wasn't joy exactly, more like surrender, the sound of someone too tired to keep the wall up. She leaned back, shoulders softening for the first time since I'd known her. For a long moment, we didn't speak. The world moved around us, pages turning, the faint murmur of voices, a barista calling an order, but in that pocket of quiet, it felt like only the two of us existed. Finally, she said it. Not a confession, not a plea, just the truth, stripped bare. "I don't know how to let someone close again." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. "Then don't. Just let me sit here." Her lips parted, like she might argue, but then closed again. She studied me, searching for some hidden catch, and when she didn't find one, she let out a breath I think she'd been holding for years. Slowly, carefully, her hand drifted across the table. It didn't take mine, not completely. Her fingers just brushed against the back of my hand, the lightest touch, trembling with restraint. I didn't move, didn't grip, didn't press. Just let her rest there, the warmth of her skin against mine saying more than words could manage. We sat like that, two people balanced on the edge of something neither of us had planned, something we'd both tried to resist. No declarations, no promises, just a quiet collapse into the space between us, where the walls had finally given way. After a while, she whispered, almost to herself, "Maybe this is enough." I didn't answer. I only let my hand stay beneath hers, steady, certain. And for once, silence felt like the only thing we needed. It's strange, looking back now. At the beginning, I thought what I felt for her was just curiosity, maybe fascination. The kind that passes once you realize the distance between you and someone else is too wide to cross. But it wasn't distance. Not really. It was fear, hers, mine, both of ours. She taught me that love doesn't always arrive like a thunderclap. Sometimes it's quieter than that. Sometimes it's in the pauses, in the unsaid words, in the way someone sits across from you and finally lets the silence feel safe instead of unbearable. She never became the woman I thought I wanted. She was something else entirely. Complicated, scarred, unwilling to promise me anything she couldn't give. And maybe that's why it mattered. Because I didn't fall in love with a dream or a version of her that didn't exist. I fell for the truth of her, with all the weight she carried. And me? I wasn't just the kid who worked late in a repair shop anymore. Being with her, even in the fractured, hesitant way it happened, forced me to grow into someone steadier. Someone who could sit in uncertainty and not demand easy answers. We never put labels on what we were. We didn't need to. What we had wasn't about definitions. It was about showing up, even when it scared us. About learning that love doesn't erase regret, or fear, or loss. It just makes room for them, and still chooses to stay. I think that's what surprised me most. It wasn't about fixing her, or her fixing me. It was about both of us deciding not to walk away when we easily could have. Even now, when I hear her laugh, low, unguarded, real, it feels like proof that maybe I gave her something too. A reminder that she didn't have to carry everything alone. If you're listening to this, maybe you know what it's like. Maybe you've met someone who didn't fit the script of what love is supposed to look like. Someone who challenged you, or scared you, or forced you to feel more than you planned. And maybe you didn't know what to do with it either. But here's what I learned. Sometimes, The most impossible connections are the ones that teach us who we really are. And if you've ever loved in a way that felt wrong but somehow turned out right, then maybe you'll understand why I don't regret a single moment. Not even the hardest ones. Especially not those. Because she once told me, "You'll regret loving me." And I told her, "Then I'll love regret too." Turns out, I meant it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who believes in love that doesn't follow the rules. And tell me in the comments, have you ever loved someone you weren't supposed to, and found out it changed you anyway?